The year was 1861. The United States of America, once a young and hopeful nation built on dreams of liberty, was now standing on the edge of destruction. Beneath the shining promise of freedom, two very different worlds had formed. The industrial North, filled with factories, railroads, and progress, and the agrarian South, whose wealth depended on cotton, plantations, and most of all, enslaved labor. For decades, tension had been building. Politicians argued in Congress. Newspapers screamed about states' rights and morality. And in the hearts of millions, the question burned like fire. Could a nation founded on freedom survive while half of it enslaved others? In November 1860, a tall, thoughtful man from Illinois was elected president, Abraham Lincoln. He opposed the spread of slavery into new territories. To many Southerners, Lincoln's victory was not just political, it was personal. They feared he would destroy their entire way of life. Within weeks, Southern states began to secede, to break away from the Union. South Carolina was the first, followed by Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Texas. Together, they formed the Confederate States of America. Jefferson gave us the president. Lincoln, heartbroken and determined, refused to recognize the Confederacy. The House divided against the South would not stand. And now his words were being policy. April 12, 1861, dawn broke over the harbor of Johnson. Inside a fortress called Fort Sumter, Union soldiers lay their crown under the American flag. Outside, Confederate cannons took aim. When the first shot thundered across the water, history changed forever. The Civil War had begun. The battle lasted 34 hours. Fort Sumter fell, and the Union's flag flew down. From that moment, there was no turning back. The North rose to preserve the Union. The South fought to defend its independence. Brothers would fight brothers. Fathers would bury sons. The nation would defend itself. On one side stood the Union, led by President Abraham Lincoln and generals like Ulysses S. and Tecumseh Sherman. They wore blue uniforms, marched to fight at drum, and carried Springfield rifles and bayonets. They fought for unity and for the under-slavery. On the other side stood the Confederacy, under President Jefferson Davis and brilliant generals like In July 1861, thousands gathered near Bull Run Creek in Virginia, expecting a quick northern victory. But what began as a parade to glory turned into chaos and blood. Confederate forces, led by Stonewall Jackson, stood firm like a wall, earning him his famous nickname. The Union Army fled back to Washington in panic. The North realized this war would not end easily. Over the next year, the war raged across fields, rivers, and towns. Antietam, Shiloh, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville. Each name became a wound on the nation's memory. The weapons were brutal: rifled muskets, cannons, ironclad ships, and mini-balls that tore through flesh and bone. More men died in the Civil War than in all previous American wars combined. The battlefields were hell on earth. At Antietam, over 23,000 men fell in a single day, the bloodiest day in American history. Doctors worked without anesthesia. Soldiers screamed in agony. The air was filled with the smell of smoke and death. But even in darkness, there were heroes. Women like Clara Barton and Dorothea Dix nursed the wounded and built the foundations of modern medical care. Former slaves escaped through secret networks like the Underground Railroad, guided by brave souls such as Harriet Tubman, and thousands of African Americans joined the Union Army, fighting not just for the nation, but for their freedom. By late 1862, Lincoln knew that this war was no longer just about saving the Union. It was about redefining freedom itself. On January 1st, 1863, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all enslaved spoke just 272 words, but they became immortal. That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. By 1864, Lincoln had found his warrior, General Ulysses S. Grant. Grant's strategy was simple but merciless: destroy the Confederate army and break its will to fight. He ordered General William Tecumseh Sherman to march from Atlanta to Savannah, burning everything he had. Sherman's march to the sea left a trail of fire, railroads twisted, crops destroyed, cities burned. It was not just a war against armies, it was a war against the cities. By 1864, Lincoln had found his warrior, General Ulysses S. Grant. Grant's strategy was simple but merciless: destroy the Confederate army and break its will to fight. He ordered General William Tecumseh Sherman to march from Atlanta to Savannah, burning everything in his path. Sherman's march to the sea left a trail of fire, railroads twisted, crops destroyed, cities burning. It was not just a war against armies, it was a war against the South's capacity to survive. The Confederacy began to crumble. Just 5 days after the surrender, on April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. There, he was shot by John Wilkes Booth, a Southern sympathizer. Lincoln died the next morning, never